You're listening to the Public Health Epidemiology Careers Podcast, episode 162.
Welcome to the Public Health Epidemiology Careers Podcast, where we explore public health epidemiology careers and share tips and strategies to help you enter or transition into the field. And now, your host, Dr. Charlotte Hughes Huntley.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode. My guest on this episode is Dr. Matthew Fox, who is an epidemiologist and a podcaster. He joins me to share his journey into public health, which I know you'll enjoy. We had a great conversation, including a few geeky tangents that were really a lot of fun, but we quickly brought it all back into focus, so no worries. So I'm going to tell you more about my guest in just a moment, but right now I'd like to read an awesome review that was recently submitted in Apple Podcasts by one of our listeners, Boom. And Boom wrote, "Listening to this show regularly provided me with the support and encouragement I needed to pursue jobs I wasn't sure I was qualified for. I had a huge sense of self-doubt coming from a long absence from the field of public health. Listening to the personal stories from the many guests on the show slowly built up my confidence to not abandon my dreams, previous experience, and education. Connecting with Dr. Huntley on LinkedIn gave me the personal experience and encouragement. She is such a kind person who really is compassionate about building a community for people who identify their work with public health. I acknowledge her as a single major contributing factor that led me to being hired as an epidemiologist." Wow. Thank you so much for that heartfelt review. I don't think all of you really understand how much these reviews help. Not only is it helping new listeners decide to tune into these episodes, but it encourages me and my team to continue to work behind the scenes to bring these episodes every week. Sometimes I read the reviews when I'm having a rough day, and it just helps me get over the hurdles and continue forward. So thank you again, Boom. I really appreciate it. Now, let me tell you more about my guest on this episode. Dr. Fox is a professor in the departments of epidemiology and global health at Boston University. He joined Boston University in 2001, and his research interests include treatment outcomes in HIV treatment programs, infectious disease epidemiology with specific interests in HIV and pneumonia, and epidemiologic methods. Dr. Fox works on ways to improve retention in HIV care programs in South Africa from the time of testing positive through long-term treatment. As part of his work, he is involved in analysis to assess the impact of changes in South Africa's national treatment guidelines for HIV. Dr. Fox also does research on quantitative bias analysis and co-authored a book on these methods, applying quantitative bias analysis to epidemiologic data. He is also the host of a public health journal club podcast called Free Associations, designed to help people stay current in the public health literature and think critically about the quality of research studies. He currently teaches a third-level epidemiologic methods class, advanced epidemiology, as well as 2 other doctoral-level epidemiologic methods courses. Let's connect my interview with Dr. Fox now. So today I'm really happy to introduce you to my guest, Dr. Fox. So Dr. Fox, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really kind of geeky excited about this conversation because not only are you an epidemiologist, but you're a podcaster. So this is like overload for me right now.
It'll be fun to talk about both.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just start from the beginning. Why don't you just take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a public health researcher. I'm an epidemiologist. I work at Boston University, where I am a professor of global health and of epidemiology. And the majority of the work that I do is focused on issues around HIV care and treatment in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly with a focus on South Africa, which is where I've lived and spent some time, And we really focus on ways to help the government of South Africa improve access to HIV care and treatment, and to improve outcomes for those who are taking HIV treatment.
Very important work, and also very interesting work. I would love to dig in a little bit more. So, well, I always ask about your journey. I love to ask my guests about the journey, like when you become interested in just progressing along. So let's start right there with you. Let's dig into, when did you first become interested in public health as a career?
So my career path has been a bit of a winding one, not winding in the sense that I've had many other careers before this. I've only ever had one, but I just sort of fell into a lot of things. So I was in my undergrad days, I did some study abroad programs, and that got me interested in working internationally and international travel. And so when I graduated, I was a literature major as an undergrad, so pretty far from the kind of work that I'm doing now. And I didn't have a lot of skills, but I knew that I wanted to travel. I knew I wanted to get involved in working with people in other countries. And so I joined the Peace Corps, and I spent 2.5 years in Turkmenistan, which is a country that few people have spent much time in. And, spending 2.5 years living with people in another country really changes your perspective. And I wasn't specifically interested in public health at that point, but I knew I was interested in international development and things like that. And I came back from the Peace Corps and really thought about doing a degree in international development, but just sort of fell into a job working in a school of public health at Boston University, just doing administrative work, and got to know people and thought, this actually really is what I want to do. I wanted to do a master's degree in global health, which I started doing, but then quickly, as I was required to take my core courses, found that epidemiology actually was of more interest to me than just a general global health program. And so I switched over to the Epi degree within the master's program. I think it was Epi in biostatistics then, and loved it so much that I stayed on to do my PhD, and actually have been on the faculty at Boston University ever since I finished my PhD in 2007.
Oh, wow. So you completed your graduate work at Boston University and then just continued on?
I did. I have been working with colleagues at Boston University doing observational epidemiology, but also randomized trials in countries all over the world, really, while I was still doing my doctoral program. And so because I was so integrated into the work that we were doing, it just made sense to stay on. And, it's a place that I have really enjoyed being. And so it just made sense to continue on.
Wow, that's pretty great. Let's go back a little bit to your work with the Peace Corps. Tell us where Turkmenistan is, if you can describe it, because this may be the first time others, or maybe it's just me, first time I've really even heard of Turkmenistan. So I've got to kind of look up my global map, but just give us kind of a perspective of where it is.
I suspect you are not alone. Certainly it was 1995 when I went there, and when they told me that Turkmenistan was where they were going to send me, I certainly had to look it up on a map. It had never heard of it before, but Turkmenistan was the southernmost point in the Soviet Union. When I went there in 1995, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and they were 2 years into independence. And it's in Central Asia. To the south, it would border Iran and Afghanistan. And then on the north, it borders a lot of the other Stan countries, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and then over near the Caspian Sea. And it's a Islamic, it's an Islamic history. I wouldn't call it an overly Muslim country. During the Soviet era, religion was not really allowed, but since it's gained its independence, it's developed more of a Muslim identity. But still, I would say much more Soviet than many of the other countries that are in the region. And it's just it was a fascinating place to spend a few years. It's a part of the world that I had never heard of, and probably never would have spent any time if it weren't for this opportunity. And, getting to live with people and work alongside them and learn about their lives and and try to see if there was anything I could teach them. I have to say I was an English teacher in the Peace Corps, but I'm not convinced anyone ever learned any English from me, but I certainly got a lot out of it, which I think is a common thing that happens in the Peace Corps. But it was a really interesting time, and it's shaped a lot of the way that I think about the world.
Yeah, I can relate. That's really fascinating when you have an opportunity to work with another country in another country. It really does open up your perspective. I'm going to also ask you about your time in South Africa, because you said you lived there a bit as well.
Yeah, so I went to South Africa shortly after finishing my PhD and joining the faculty. So I have a colleague who I work with. She's an economist in our global health department. And she had moved to South Africa while I was still doing my doctoral work. But I continued to work with her, and she went there to set up an economics research program alongside the University of Witwatersrand. And when she decided that she wanted to move back to the US, our university was hoping to continue to build that partnership. And she asked whether or not I was interested in going over and building up an epidemiology program alongside the economics program. And I had 2 young kids at the time. And my first thought was, well, I'm sure that my wife would have no interest in moving our whole family halfway across the world. But I thought I'd be polite and say, sure, I'll go ahead and chat with my wife about it. And I went home and I asked my wife, and she said, that sounds interesting. Let's go check it out. So we did. We had a look, and it seemed like somewhere that was a good move for me professionally and for us as a family. And so we did. And I have to say, it was an amazing experience. Having the opportunity to work alongside some of the most amazing colleagues who run a research office focused on, it's global health and development in general, but it's much more mainly focused on HIV and tuberculosis research, was just such a fascinating opportunity. And then getting to live in South Africa and see the way the country was developing post the apartheid era was really phenomenal. And, professionally, it gave me some opportunities I think that I wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise, because I was just so, I was there in the country where there was a lot of need for skills that I had. And I think that allowed me to access a lot of interesting research projects that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. And I'm really, really grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds great too. I'm intrigued by your journey, and I can see how, really rewarding, these experiences have been and play a role in your passion for public health. So let me ask you, how do you think your previous roles and those experiences help you transition into your current work?
Well, I think the biggest one would be the time that I spent, living in Turkmenistan, in the sense that it just gave me a much broader perspective on the world, and certainly an understanding of the role that health plays in that, but also the roles that governments play in deciding who is healthy and who isn't, and the roles that governments can play in forming policies that will help change those circumstances that people are living in. And so having the opportunity to really live alongside people and understand their perspectives on how the programs that were being developed to improve their lives were being seen, which was not always in a positive light, really gave me the understanding of that this really can't just be a top-down approach. There has to be buy-in from the community and a willingness for people to or an interest in people in what it is that the government or NGOs are really trying to provide. That health is something that everyone has a stake in, but they also have to feel empowered in order to be able to make changes in their lives to improve their health. And then I would say, moving to South Africa, where I was in a bit of a different role, where it's much more in a research role, I think I got much more of a perspective for how much history shapes health, and that undoing the power structures of the past is incredibly difficult to do, takes time, and takes work, but it is, it's really important work that needs to be done, but it is difficult and it is challenging and requires substantial amounts of effort to really make change.
Both very powerful statements, and what you're bringing from these opportunities and your roles in the past. And I can see how, as an epidemiology professor, how that really affects you in the classroom. I can just imagine the stories you're able to really share with your students to help, kind of help them to understand the sometimes kind of dry lessons coming from the text. You really help that come to life. Do you think your students really engage with your stories? Do you think that's really been helpful for you in trying to help them understand some of the principles you teach when it comes down to, the classroom?
I think that's right. And I do think that, having spent time in the places that we're talking about helps to convey to students the real issues that are going on. I also think, as you say, epidemiology is much more about the discipline, as I teach it anyway, teaching a lot of epi-methods courses about the methods of how we do epidemiology, which can become very divorced from the actual people who are represented in the data sets that we're dealing with. And I think, the other lesson that I think that I got out of spending time in these countries and that I hope that I convey to my students is that, data is something that we spend time as epidemiologists trying to summarize and trying to put parameters on that can quickly summarize the entirety of the data set. And you lose the stories of the individuals who make up that data set. And you've always got to remember that those are people, that each line of data that you have represents a real life with a real issue that hopefully you can provide some insight on. But those are real people with, hopes and dreams and, and health issues that are part of their bigger story. And it isn't just that one line of code that summarizes them.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that too. That is definitely a challenge because when you're working with the data, you get caught up in exactly that, the data. You're looking for the answer. You want it to look nice. You want it to be complete. You need the solution that comes out and everything to be, we're looking for the p-values, and we can easily lose sight of the people. And it's almost a constant reminder, for ourselves and how we portray it and explain it, that, the data tells a story. It's really about the people, the communities. We have to always kind of come full circle and remember that it's, it represents the community, just like you said. That's, okay, so we're geeking out a little bit extra on the epi stuff right here. We may have lost some audience members. Come on back. We're going to let that part go. We just had a little moment there. So let's shift a little bit, because I want to ask you about the population and the condition, or depending on what you're passionate about in public health, whether it's a particular population, condition, or other public health problem. And I know you've talked a lot about HIV, but I don't know if is that it, or is there, how would you describe, your passion for public health right now?
Yeah, I would say it is certainly HIV, and that I think is because I put so much time and effort into studying HIV, particularly as I mentioned in South Africa. But I don't know that I am will be doing research on HIV for the rest of my life, because I also, as I said, I think about the people who are in the data sets that we are collecting information on. And there are also issues of chronic diseases that people are dealing with. So I think hypertension and diabetes are very overlooked conditions in South Africa and sub-Saharan Africa in general, because there has been so much attention put on the very real and very important crises of HIV and tuberculosis over the past couple of decades. But as those conditions become more and more under control, I think identifying ways to replicate the successes that have happened in the rolling out of care and treatment services for HIV and tuberculosis, we need to learn those lessons to be able to now provide support for hypertension, diabetes, and hypercholesterolemia, those things that an aging population is dealing with. And, those are obviously success stories in that if you are getting to the point where you're dealing with the the chronic diseases, you're living a longer life. But that doesn't mean that we have to keep our attention solely on those infectious conditions. So my passion right now is HIV and tuberculosis, but I can see it changing over time.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'm going to fight against my urge to want to go into a super geeky conversation about some of those chronic conditions, because I'm definitely one that's very passionate about hypertension, diabetes for sure, and sort of the underlying condition of, obesity that kind of relays into all of that. So I can definitely see what you're, as you're describing the importance in the, really addressing this in the area that you've already been watching. You notice that it's been kind of down the list of priorities in terms of, what conditions we're attacking or addressing in sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa. So, it'd be interesting. We'll have to continue that discussion a little down the road. I'd like to know kind of where you gravitate to, and you have to keep in touch with me on that one.
Absolutely.
So I always ask my guests to share feedback, career advice, and tips for students. But before we get into that, I really want to ask you about podcasting, because I found, I think it was from Twitter, because we are in that same community, that network on Twitter. But I know that you had one podcast, and then you mentioned to me that you actually have two. So please talk to me a bit about your podcast. How did you get into podcasts? What is it about?
Well, so how I got into podcasting is kind of a funny story, in that our university was looking to develop some programs that were what they refer to as outward facing, that they felt we were very focused on, training our own students and doing our research, but that we didn't have enough interaction with those outside of our university. And we're looking to put together a series of approaches to dealing with that. They hired some consultants who came up with a list of things that we could do. And I was one of the people who was invited to critique what they had put together. And they had a whole list of activities, and just sort of off to the side, very, very much, as sort of like a maybe someday down the road, they had listed podcasting. And for whatever reason, and I to your listeners, I promise I'm normally not like this, but for some reason, I raised my hand and I said, I noticed you have podcasting on there. That really sounds like a terrible idea. Who would ever want to listen to us talking about ourselves and our own research? And I still sort of stand by that, but I went home and I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, I don't know that anybody really wants to listen to me talking about my research necessarily. But one thing that I do think is interesting is that we, as faculty members, will often have journal clubs in which we look at articles that have, they've gotten a lot of, airtime, and we'll critique them and see whether they really hold up. And we have a lot of fun doing it, because I think you learn so much when you listen to the way that other people think about a particular article, and they have insights that you wouldn't necessarily have. And I thought, we could do that as a podcast, and certainly, that would allow people at other institutions to sit in on our journal clubs and hear the way that we think about things, and then give us any feedback that they had. So we started a podcast a few years ago called Free Associations. It's with some colleagues at Boston University, in which we do just that. We pick articles that have gotten a lot of airtime in the media, so things that the lay public has probably heard about because it's gotten picked up in the news. And then we critique them both as epidemiologists and clinicians, but also seeing whether or not the headlines that get written about them hold up to the scrutiny that we think that they should be given. And we try our best to have fun doing it, because it makes it, I think, more pleasant to listen to. But it's been a great experience. So that's one. And then the other podcast I've been doing recently is a podcast with a colleague, Haley Bannock, at the University of Buffalo. And this is a podcast that really is designed for epidemiologists. It's a methods-focused podcast where we talk to experts in the field about kind of the cutting-edge methods that are being developed in the field, and we try to understand them better so that hopefully the audience can learn from the conversations that we're having. And I have to say, it's fast become my favorite part of my job.
Oh, that is excellent. Actually, you've got to make sure I get links to both of those. I'm very interested in both myself. What is the methods focused, the second podcast title?
So that one is called Serious Epidemiology. And the reason for the title is it's sponsored by the Society for Epidemiologic Research, which everybody calls SER. So we took the SER and turned that into Serious Epidemiology.
Oh, gotcha. Nice. Yeah, that is actually, I'm going to make sure that I link to this in the show notes, and I'm going to check it out myself. This reminded me of a story when I first started working as an epidemiologist. I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and we had a small team of epidemiologists who are, well, the company's based in the UK. So half of our epi team was around the London office, and some of them were partly from their homes and in the office there. And then the other half of the team was US based. So we work remotely from our homes. And every week we would get together and have our epi team meetings. We talk about the same type of projects that we're working on and things like that. And one of our team members had the idea of starting a journal club so that we would have something different to talk about and just to kind of spice up our meetings. And at first I thought, well, how's this going to work? But then I got excited about it. It became a fun thing to do because as a student, I didn't find the idea of a journal club to be exciting. But after graduating and working in the field, it was something I really missed. And it helped us to kind of, like you were describing with the podcast, we could talk about our different takeaways from a particular article. And it was just, we'd pick something that was completely different than what we, normally were assigned to work on as our work. So we could just kind of explore topics of interest. And it was interesting to just hear different people's perspective on the same article. And then after a little while, we started inviting people outside of the epi team that worked for the company that were interested in maybe just kind of sitting in on the, our journal club meetings. It was a lot of fun. We did it for, I don't know, maybe about a year. And the person that really led it left the company and then it fell apart. But I didn't know there was a podcast that did that. I'm definitely interested, personally very interested. And I think a lot of our listeners would be interested in that too.
It's interesting. As you say, I mean, it's fun to hear other people's views on critiquing articles. I think for us, the balance is always on trying to understand that no epidemiologic study is ever perfect. And so trying to make it clear that we're not trying to say that just because we have concerns about a particular study, that it is necessarily a bad study or it doesn't give us useful information, just that there is, you have to be cautious when you use this information. And early on, to try and make this clear, we took on one of our own studies and we ripped it apart and critiqued it and tried to demonstrate that even, just because we are able to find the flaws in a study, doesn't mean you can't find the flaws in all of our studies, and that we don't, we still take pride in that work, and so it's a bit of a balancing act, but it is fun, and it's particularly nice when we get authors who recommend their studies, knowing that we're going to critique them. I have just such enormous respect for people who have the confidence to be able to say I am open to additional feedback on my work. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, I look forward to checking that out. That's I've got my notes here. Probably I'll be adding that to my playlist today. Okay, so thank you for sharing that information and really explaining. That's really I appreciate that. I know the audience is too. These are epi focused people are like, oh yeah, I can't wait to check that out, and everybody else is like, okay, whatever.
I promise that we do actually have fun. So if you want to just listen in once or twice, you might enjoy it.
Yeah. I definitely encourage everyone to do that. So like I said, make sure you check out the show notes page and you can connect to the podcast that we're talking about. So, all right. So as we begin to kind of wrap up, let's, the last thing I want to ask is around the career advice. I love to ask my guests to share some tips or, advice for public health careers. And we're going to break it up. I'm going to ask you first to address students because we have a lot of listeners who are students in, a variety of programs around the world, really. So they may be undergraduate students, they may be graduate level students. But if thinking of students that are listening, what kind of advice would you have for students interested in public health career?
Well, so I think that probably the best thing you can do as a student is to get as much experience as you possibly can during your undergraduate or even your graduate time, and really make the most use of that time. And I think one of the challenges to that, of course, is the way to get that experience is to connect with your faculty members. And your faculty members, I don't want to excuse it, but we are busy, and we get lots of requests from students. And so I think the best thing that you can do is, well, one, just don't take no for an answer, but also just to get to know your faculty members. I know that when I was a student, I came to my classes. I hope I was prepared, and I hope I really engaged in the discussions. But once I left the classroom, I didn't really make an effort to try and really connect with my faculty members. And so then when I went to them later looking for opportunities, they didn't really know me as well as they could have. And so I think just putting in that effort to make sure your faculty members know who you are. I mean, that doesn't excuse, of course, your faculty members should also be doing the same and getting to know you, but really making the most of that time by getting to know them, so that when you come to them with looking for advice, looking for opportunities, they know you and they want to see you succeed.
I think that's excellent advice. I know I encourage my daughter, who is a senior now, when she started college, I really encouraged that. And she built a relationship she's a biology major, and it's a small department. And she built strong connections with the faculty early on. And that has been such a game changer for her now, as she's applying and preparing to apply for graduate school and getting those recommendations. They know her because she got to know them early on in a very genuine way. And really don't use any excuse, because I teach online programs, and you can still engage with your faculty members and build relationships, even if you're in an online degree program. It takes a little bit of effort in being creative, but there's still, we're still people on the other side of these computer screens. And I received a request this morning for me to write a recommendation for one of my students, and I engaged quite a bit with this student throughout the term. So it's easy for me to be able to write this recommendation for her, because not only did I grade her assignments and her work, but just interact and engage with her throughout the term. So, like you said, it does require you to make a little bit of effort sometime. The faculty is always busy, but we do make the effort as a faculty member. But students, you can get creative in how you are reaching out, and it's about making that effort. So thank you for sharing that, because that's an excellent point and really needed to be highlighted. So now let's think about the graduates, like someone who has already completed a degree, and maybe, it could be a recent graduate, could have graduated for a while, but they're still trying to get into the field of public health. So do you have any advice for someone who fits that category?
So I think the real key is building your professional network. So I find I get a lot of people who reach out to me just wanting to do informational interviews. And I always say yes to those, because I want to get to know as many people as I can. But I think when people think about informational interviews, they think that those are really just about getting to know more about a particular field and to get some advice. But I think the thing that you have to keep in mind is what you're really doing is building your network. And if you can develop a connection with somebody in a field that you're interested in, and then that person, hears about a job or a role that might be right for you, they're gonna pass you on, because they want to help you out. And so, anything that you can do to build that professional network, so that when the opportunities come up, people are thinking of you, I think is all to your benefit. And that might be through joining a professional society. It might be through doing informational interviews. It may be just through going back to your faculty members from your degree program and asking, if they are, able to put you in touch with people that you could talk to about places that might be of interest. I would say that many faculty members are very focused on the world of academia. And so oftentimes we are not always the best people to ask for career advice because we might steer you in a direction that isn't necessarily right for you because it's what we know. But we often know people who are working in careers that are outside of academia, and you should be tapping into those networks as well.
Again, excellent advice. So important. I won't even go there because I could go on a long tangent about networking. I could get on a soapbox about that, but I won't. But just well said. I just really agree with that.
Well, can I add? So I am an introvert by nature, and I think that introverts often struggle with the process of building professional networks because it is, sometimes it's not in our nature to want to reach out. It feels uncomfortable. But I will say, as an introvert, I think that building those networks is absolutely the most important thing you can do. And so really pushing yourself. I have a lot of love for the introverts because it's who I am. And so I think about introverts often, and it's a struggle. And I just want to say, really, push yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. As an introvert myself, I have to put very intentional effort to push myself in these areas. And that's why I often talk about the perspective of just genuine interest. That's why I share that tip all the time. If you just, instead of looking at, okay, well, I need to find a job and I need to find out if they're hiring, instead of taking that approach, which is really awkward, it is much better to just look at networking as building genuine connections and relationships and asking about what they're doing and being just interested. If you're leading with an interest, then just exploring what they're doing and asking these questions that are just very authentic. It feels a lot less awkward, if you're just getting to know someone that is doing something that you find interesting. It's a whole lot less awkward and a lot less difficult to take the steps.
I think that's so right. And I think people respond to that so much better because they are, getting to know you as a person. And once they become invested in you, they want you to succeed. And so they want to help you any way that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're getting the stamp of approval from two introverts on your gold standard for networking approach. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation. Such great information, great tips. I love the stories. Just thank you so much for taking time and joining me and sharing your journey. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to chat.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Fox as much as I did. After he shared his advice and tips and the recording ended, we chatted for a bit longer and I explained to him how much we were on the same page. I have 2 career coaching programs that are available through my website to help anyone who needs additional guidance and step-by-step resources for getting experience in public health and also for networking in public health. As he started sharing his tips, and he discussed the importance of getting experience and then also networking, I was cheering on the inside and fighting the urge to just start preaching on the topic. I could not agree with him more about the importance of these 2 areas. Now, if you would like to connect with Dr. Fox and check out the 2 podcasts that he discussed in the interview, one was Free Associations and the other was Serious Epidemiology, then just visit the show notes page for this episode, which is episode 161, and you'll find the links to connect with both podcasts and Dr. Fox. And I encourage you to check out both of these podcasts, which sound equally interesting to me. So go to drchuntley.com, and that's drchhuntley.com, and click on the podcast tab from the main menu. And from there, just navigate to 161, and you'll find the show notes page. You can also click on the career coaching from the main menu and learn more about either one of those programs that I mentioned that is available for getting experience in public health or networking. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to the Public Health Epidemiology Careers Podcast at drchuntley.com.